Hello, Tricky Fox here. Today I want to talk with you about... What the fox?
Oh, hello there. Is this your place? I might have crashed a jet plane onto your lawn.
You did what? Oh my god, everything is on fire!
Well, at least I found a fellow non-pony this time around. Hey guys, Tyandaga here, and after a long time of searching, I finally found another non-pony. Who would have thought that you'd find a three-tailed Japanese fox in Germany of all places? And because I, well, you know, depreciated some of his property.
Destroyed would be the proper way to phrase it.
And now I have to work with him to make up for it.
And since he came to look for more non-ponies, I thought it might be a good topic for today's video. So no horsing around this time.
So, when it comes to making original characters, or OCs for short, it can be a real to-do to make your character stand out, especially in the MLP community. It's all too common that people choose to make their characters ponies, but this is expected, of course. After all, that's what the show is about, so it's hardly surprising to see many of us gravitate towards this choice. But what if you don't want to have a pony character? What if ponies simply don't cut it for you? What if you want to make your character a different animal?
This seems like a strange idea, of course. The show is called My Little Pony after all, but the beauty of MLP is that it comes with a rich and almost unexplored world populated by a multitude of different creatures. Each one has its own culture and style of living. There are barely any shows that allow for such a multitude of different characters to choose from, and it is easy to think of new ones as well.
Now, obviously ponies are awesome, so why would you want to choose a non-pony character? Probably the most common reason that people choose non-pony OCs is that they feel that a pony simply isn't the best option to represent themselves. Maybe you don't identify as easily with Pegasi, or unicorns, or earth ponies, but instead maybe a zebra, or a giraffe, or an armadillo, who knows? Sometimes another animal sounds much more appealing than being a pony. Everyone has their own unique way of expressing themselves, and an OC is an excellent avenue to do that.
Another thing I noticed is that a lot of people that actually use non-pony OCs are also artists. This of course is not true for everyone, but it could be seen as a simple expression of creativity.
Exactly! And not only that, but it's a great way to stand out a little from the crowd. Ponies are obviously very popular in the MLP community, so having a character that isn't a pony really does give you an edge if you want to be unique.
As you can see, there are quite a few reasons why someone would use a non-pony OC, but perhaps a more interesting question than why is how. After all, creating a pony is actually pretty simple when you think about it. You have Earth, Pegasus and Unicorn ponies, well, and Alicorns if you are a daring do. But non-pony OCs? So of course you have to decide first what you want your OC to be. It's probably the easiest option to pick a species we saw in the show, and you already have a rather varied pool of possible choices. Perhaps Griffin and Changelings are the most popular choices, but you also have zebras, diamond dogs, dragons and minotaurs, just to name a few.
And it can make things much easier to pick up one of the more common non-pony types from the show, since there are plenty of examples to reference if you plan on creating your character visually. But not everything is a good choice, especially dragons, and they must be handled carefully. Adult dragons are treated more like monsters in the show, and you probably want to use an OC that can interact with ponies, so it would probably be better to limit yourself to a baby dragon like Spike, or teenage dragons like Ember or Garble.
Not to mention that it is quite difficult to model your OC after villainous characters. Let's take Tyrek as an example. He is unofficially a centaur, which under normal circumstances would be an interesting idea, but as Tyrek is the only centaur in the show so far, your OC will be automatically associated with the biggest bad guy in the series. The fact that he is red and black probably doesn't help. We see other centaurs in his Fiendship is Magic issue, but they all look like demons from hell, which is probably not a direction you want to go with your OC. That being said, I wouldn't say that it can't be done, however it will need a lot of work. It is probably best to differentiate your design a bit from Tyrek, making them look less monstrous. You could handwave that with the explanation that there are different tribes of centaurs. If you actually want to have an evil looking OC, this is of course a different story, but be prepared. Some people like to make fun of characters like that.
Changelings, on the other hand, are another very common choice when it comes to non-Pony OCs. However, while Changelings in my opinion are really cool, they've hardly ever appeared in the show. And even in these rare moments, all we've seen from the Changelings are evil, drone-like characters that tend to all look the same. So if you do plan to go this route, it always helps to give your Changeling OC something different that otherwise sets them apart from any other Changeling. And this can be literally anything, from a different shape or body type to a funny hat. It also doesn't hurt to have a backstory to go along with the character, to explain why they're different from the other Changelings. Of course, you can always make a Changeling character just like the other Changelings, but in my personal opinion, these guys tend to blur in the crowd quite quickly and have trouble standing out.
Most other non-ponies are less of a problem. For example, you see griffins and donkeys live among ponies, which is seemingly normal, even though they might be minorities. Only zebras are seemingly rather rare in Equestria and might have to deal with some prejudice. Griffins are also a rather popular choice, and thanks to the lost treasure of Griffinstone, we know how much freedom we have while creating a Griffin OC.
The best thing to think of when creating a non-Pony OC is what animal really speaks out to you. It's always great when you can find an awesome animal that appears in the show that you identify with. However, just because the animal doesn't appear in the show doesn't mean that you can't use it. So don't be afraid to try to make characters that are animals that haven't yet appeared in the show.
But as it is, there are some things that might fit better into the world than others. One noticeable thing is that most beings in Equestria are based on some mystical animal or beast. Even unicorns and pegasi are example for that, as are minotaurs and griffins. You'll notice that most of them are based on Greek myths, like the Hydra. So if you want to base your OC on a mystical creature, something from Greek mythology is a safe choice. However, there are also other creatures. Changelings are more based on Celtic myths, and then we have Ahuizotl, perhaps the most obscure creature we have seen so far. I conclude, since we have Aztec mythology in MLP, everything is fair game. So I would recommend to check out as many different sources as possible. Mythology, folklore or fairy tales, they all come with fascinating creatures that make for a great OC. That's why my OC is based on the Japanese fox spirit. While I doubt if we'll ever see Japanese creatures in the show, a magical fox that messes with ponies for fun fits the setting quite nicely.
Now, one tip to keep in mind when making non-Pony OCs is that hooved animals tend to work out better than animals that aren't. Now, this usually is most evident in the show itself, as the animals who end up being sentient tend to be hooved, or somewhat related to ponies. Now, this obviously isn't always the case, griffins and daimyon dogs being prime examples, but generally, other animals in the show aren't portrayed as sentient, so you may have a harder time working around the lore of Equestria when making an animal that is known to not speak in the show.
Of course, you don't have to limit yourself to pre-existing stuff. Breezes are a good example. They aren't based on anything in particular, so you can invent your own race of fantasy creatures as well. But keep in mind that it is hard to design something from scratch and that they will probably attract criticism one way or the other, especially if you create any type of hybrid. I'm personally not a big fan of hybrids, and I wouldn't recommend to combine more than two animals at the same time, as the result usually looks more weird than anything else. It works for characters like Discord, but he is a very special case. So if you go down this road, be prepared to face some harsh criticism.
Now, when it comes down to actually designing your character visually, you might find that you're in for an extra challenge artistically. Obviously, when it comes to non-Pony OCs, especially if the species has yet to appear in the show, there tend to be very few references to work with. Oftentimes, those who make non-Pony OCs have to resort to images of what their chosen animal looks like in real life, or pictures from other artists outside of the community. This can make it very difficult to draw, especially if you want to have a show-accurate representation of your character. However, I also do recommend taking a look at the MLP comics for inspiration, as they feature many different species of animal that have yet to pop up in the show, and you might even find something interesting in older MLP generations.
But on the flip side, this challenge can be a lot of fun. I'm not even a good artist, but I actually enjoyed it a lot to work on my OC. But be prepared that there is a decent chance that you will go through multiple redesigns before you are actually satisfied with the result. Speaking of using real life animals as reference, that is actually a very good point to bring up. If you look at most non-ponies in the show, they are usually not as colorful as ponies. Yaks and bisons are brown like their real-world counterpart, and even the diamond dogs have color schemes reminiscent of real dogs as well. Only dragons and breezes are seemingly an exception to this rule, but as those are fantasy creatures, they can get away with that. So while not necessary, it is recommended to stick with natural colors when designing a non-pony. On another note, if you're going for an OC based on a human hybrid like a Minotaur or a Siren for example, remove human features as much as possible. Humans don't exist in Equestria, and beings that should resemble humans have been altered to look more animalistic. Take the Manticore for example. A Manticore should have the face of a human, while the Manticore in MLP has a lion's head. That is also why Ironwood is probably blue. If you were to color him brown, he would look far too human. On the other paw, hybrid parts have been shown to be interchangeable. You can combine any bird and any cat to create your own griffin, and the Chimera in Some Pony to Watch Over Me is shown with a tiger head instead of the classical lion head.
Okay, so you now have your character all down pat, but what about their backstory? Or more importantly, how do they themselves fit into the world of Equestria? Where do they live? How do they interact with other ponies or species, if at all? Where do they come from? Do they have any family? These types of questions are important to answer for your character, as who they are, what they do, and how they behave in the world around them is absolutely crucial to making a successful character.
These questions are mandatory for every OC, but are actually much more important for non-ponies. If you introduce a species that wasn't in the show before, you need to have an idea what the species is like. Do they live among ponies like donkeys, or do they have their own culture like yaks? It is also worth mentioning that non-ponies tend to be stand-ins for real-life cultures. So it's not a bad idea to base the culture of the species you want to introduce on something that exists in our world. If your OC is a panda, why not base his culture on ancient China, just to name an example. You could also come up with a backstory that explains why your OC is more unique rather than being part of a species. But you will need some storyteller skills to pull that off.
Alright, I think that covers the most important aspects. In my opinion, I feel that making a non-Pony OC is an absolutely excellent idea. It's a great way to make something new and unique, and allows you to set yourself apart from the rest of the pack. However, it can also pose some extra challenges too, and from an artistic perspective, it can make things much more difficult if your character isn't a pony.
I agree there. It takes a lot of effort to come up with a decent non-pony, but I think it is worth it. It is a great way to take advantage of Equestria's fantasy setting, and it is a really fun way to expand upon it. But I have to add, while we talk a lot about it in this video, there are no clear do's or do nots when it comes to OC creation. This is more a guide to make your OC as show conform as possible by examining trends in character design within the show. These are no real rules, but I'm sure these guidelines can help you to create an awesome non-pony OC of your own.
But now let's hear from you. What kind of OC do you have? What are your thoughts on non-pony OCs?
Let us know in the comments. I'm Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.
And this is Tyandaga signing out.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well. Sometimes you can be too smart for you're good, and you just outfoxed yourself the way I knew you would.
We outfoxed them.